Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another in my series of videos about how to pass an advanced driving test. And in this video we're going to take another look at the gear phase, the use of gears, but in this time in cars with automatic transmissions. So in this video I'll look at what's required from you if you're undertaking an advanced driving test, and I can demonstrate both what you need to do in a full automatic or a traditional automatic gearbox and something with a dual clutch transmission. I will cover briefly electric vehicles as well, but I haven't got access to an electric vehicle at the moment. I will do fairly soon, and I'll make a sort of supplementary video on electric vehicles and how you need to adjust your driving if you want to pass an advanced driving test in a full electric car. But automatic transmission. So automatics are, well, they're easy, aren't they? You've got one less pedal. I've got two pedals, I've got a go and a stop. I don't have to faff about with a clutch, I don't have to faff about with a gear change, I don't have to do anything with this, I was going to say gear stick, but gear selector. I don't have to do anything with that at all on driving along. As far as choice of gear, I can allow the car to do all that for me. But there are a number of other functions in the automatic gearbox as well, which do allow you to take a bit more control if you think it's appropriate. So we'll have a look at that today. But to start with, I'm going to look at the biggest mistake that I see people making on advanced driving test if they're in an automatic. Now you might think that driving an automatic takes away one of those fundamental things that you need to demonstrate on your advanced driving test, but trust me, you can drive these cars badly or you can drive them really well. And part of it is understanding how to get the best out of the transmission. But a real essential element is understanding how an automatic transmission fits in with the system of car control. And the most common mistake that I see with candidates for advanced driving test in automatic vehicles is that they forget about the gear phase. They sort of think, I don't know if they consciously think it or unconsciously, they just come to this conclusion that because the gear is automatic, because the car is automatically choosing the gear for you, that you don't need to take that into account at the gear phase. So remember, we're going information, position, speed, gear, and then acceleration. Now in an automatic car, the car still needs to get the gear. And the gear, of course, is based on the speed that you've selected, so the speed that you've reduced the car to. But because they forget that they need to take into account the gear phase, what they tend to do is this: they brake right up to the hazard. So I'm coming up to this roundabout now, I'm staying on the brakes right up to it, and then immediately they go to the accelerator pedal. They're not giving the car time to get the gear. Now you might argue, if you're technically minded, that the car doesn't need time to get the gear these days. Modern automatics are really quick, really efficient. This car, if I set the gearbox in its sort of fastest setting, it'll bang through the gears really quickly. And it doesn't really need a lot of time to get the gear, but you're forgetting that there is another benefit to having a pause, just a slight delay between finishing your braking and starting the acceleration. And that is, I'm approaching this roundabout here, I'm going to turn right, I'm going to reduce the speed on the brakes, but if I go immediately to the accelerator, I'm not giving the car time to settle off the brakes. Now when you're braking in a car, the weight transfers forward, transfers more weight over the front wheels. When you're accelerating, the weight transfers rearward. Now if you go immediately from brake to accelerator, what happens is you're not giving the car time to settle off the brakes before you introduce the accelerator. So it's sudden, you get that sudden change, and you can see what happened then. I went straight from brake to accelerator and the car just kicked down. It kicked down a gear. I'll talk about kick down in a bit, but it kicked down a gear and it really reduced the smoothness on approach and on the entry to that roundabout. We suddenly went from braking to accelerating, the car kicked down and it was rough. So to fix that problem, those of you that are looking to do an advanced driving test in an automatic car, and there are more and more of them these days, really common now, automatics in this country, remember this: give the car time to get the gear. We want a little bit of time off the brakes there before we drive into the hazard. It's not a lot. On approach to these roundabouts, it's 2 to 3 car lengths, but that's the time that it's taking for the car to settle back off the brakes and prepare it for the next phase, which is acceleration. So here, for instance, checking the mirrors, putting a signal on, coming off the gas, gently on the brakes, firming up the brakes in the middle, and then coming off the brakes there a couple of car lengths before the roundabout. That allows us to smoothly pick up the acceleration. If the car needs a gear, it's got time to do it, and it does it in an unhurried, in an unrushed way. I'll just demonstrate it a couple more times. The secret to this is how you use the brakes. I have covered this in another video and I'll put all the links in the description below, but it's using the brakes a bit more effectively in the middle portion of the braking. So checking the mirrors, put a right signal on. I'm off the gas there, gently on the brakes, firming up the braking, coming off the brakes there before we get to the roundabout, and then picking up the acceleration nice and smoothly. Now it's not easy this in an automatic. Sounds easy, doesn't it? It's just coming off the brakes a bit earlier, but it's not that easy because we're used to driving the car in a way where we don't need to think about that gear change. The gear change is just irrelevant because the car does it for you. But watch, checking the mirrors, putting a right signal on, getting my position right, I'm coming off the gas, squeezing the brakes, a bit more brakes, then off the brakes, a couple of car lengths before the roundabout. So I can smoothly pick up the acceleration and leave the roundabout. Remember, it's the outcome that we're looking for. We want the car prepared for the acceleration phase. That's what we're looking to do. Get the car settled and prepared for the acceleration phase. So I thought we'd get that out of the way right at the start of this video. That's the most common mistake that I see with people who are undertaking an advanced car test in an automatic car. And if you leave that braking late, if you don't factor in time for that gear phase, it really does affect your smoothness. And it can affect your progress as well, because your drive ends up being a bit more stilted, a bit more unsettled, a bit more uncomfortable. The car isn't happy, and it's obvious to your examiner that that's what you do. So that's that. Now, what else about automatic cars? Well, let's think about the different functions of the gearbox. Now let's be clear about this. If you want to come along on an IAM Road Smart advanced car test or a ROSPA advanced car test, and you just put the car in drive at the start of the test, and you leave it in drive and you don't touch it and you don't faff about with any of the other functions, then you know you can pass the test. But if you want to get a better pass, if you want to get a first or you want to get a gold in those tests, you're going to need to demonstrate to the examiner, to me, that you understand how the different functions of the gearbox works and that you know when to use them at an appropriate point. Under normal circumstances, with an automatic car, you'll get in it and its default will be a sort of comfort setting where it doesn't allow the car to rev particularly high until it changes up. The way cars are designed these days is they're designed to give you the most efficient gear as soon as possible, to sort of save fuel and to reduce emissions and things like that. So as you can see here, I'm in a 30 limit going downhill here, and the car has immediately changed up into 5th gear out of 7, because that's the most efficient gear that we want. Now when you're just trundling around at town speeds like this, that's absolutely fine. But once you get onto some more national speed limit roads, some more progressive roads where you want to sort of get the car up on its toes and moving a little bit more, well, what you'll find is that gearbox doesn't feel as responsive. I'll show you what I mean. So we're just coming onto a bit of national speed limit road now. It's still in a 30 limit at the moment, but when we get to the signs, I'm going to check my mirrors and I'm going to squeeze the gas. Well, actually, I'm going to delay it until we're past this parked car. Oh, they've waited. So we squeeze the gas. But when I do, what we're waiting for is the car to kick down. Now, this is a fairly sporty car and it doesn't take long to kick down, but there is a delay. And again, that delay, if we're not factoring it in, it can mean that on approach to a corner like this, let's look at the second part of this right-hander. If I want to squeeze the gas a bit more, I'm waiting for the car to kick down to get the response. And of course, if you've watched some of my other videos, you'll know that we want the car balanced on the gas right at the start of the corner. So on a road like this, it might not be best to leave the car in its default automatic setting. It might be better to put it in sport. Pretty much every automatic car these days has a sport setting, and it's not doing anything different mechanically with the gearbox. The gearbox carries on operating in the same way as it would do in any mode. But what the sport mode does is it alters the software settings and it makes the car feel a bit more lively. So in pure gearbox terms, putting the car into sport mode means it will hang on to the lower gears for longer to give you better acceleration, and it will change down to lower gears earlier to make the car more responsive as you're coming through corners. Now, I haven't got a sport mode button in this car because I said before it's a DCT gearbox, but I can replicate it by pressing M1 on the steering wheel. So that's set to a sportier automatic setting in this car, so I don't have to change gear myself. So checking the mirrors now, it's in sport now. You'll find that the car's much quicker to kick down, it holds the gears longer, and it drives, it makes the car feel more alive, more up on its toes. It makes it more responsive. So if you're going to be on a national speed limit road, you will be on your advanced driving test for quite a bit of it, put the car in sport. It's just a flick of a button. And from your perspective, you'll find that the car feels better, it drives better, it's more responsive. From the examiner's perspective, they will see that you are selecting another mode in the gearbox and that you know how that mode works and when it's appropriate to use it and when it's not appropriate to use it. Now, automatics have other settings as well. I used to have a Mercedes that had a winter setting, and that would set off in second gear to reduce the amount of torque going to the wheels and make it much less likely for the car to start spinning its wheels if it was snowy or icy or something like that. The problem is that every gearbox is different. Every manufacturer makes different automatic gearboxes. And what you need to do is really just research your own car, have a look in the manual, go on YouTube. There's lots of sort of people who own different kinds of vehicles who'll go on and give a review of the gearbox. I've done it for the DCT in the M2, and I'll put a link in the description below to those videos. So that's comfort or default mode and sports mode. The other function that we've got available to us in an automatic car is a sort of manual override. Now, going back years and years ago to the original sort of mechanical torque converter gearboxes that didn't have software or electronics or anything like that, you used to have a big gear changer down, or a big gear selector down here on the transmission tunnel, and you'd have the different modes listed, and it would go P for park, R for reverse, N for neutral, D for drive, and then you might have 3, 2, 1. And that was basically a lockout on the gearbox. So if you put it into 3, what would happen is the gearbox wouldn't change above 3rd. Or if you put it into 2, it wouldn't change above 2. It would still drop down to 1, but it wouldn't change above 2. These days, modern automatics, actually, on the whole, they tend to have paddles behind the steering wheel. So in this car, on the right is the up paddle, on the left is the down paddle, up and down through the gears, and you just pull them towards you to operate. But what's the benefit of that? Why would you want to change down a gear? If the car's doing it all itself, why would you want to take over and select a gear yourself? Well, the truth of the matter is that automatic cars tend to run on a bit. They don't have as much engine braking. You're doing this with the DCT because it's a much more direct drive through the gearbox. But automatics, certainly older automatics, tended to run on a bit more. They tended to feel like they were coasting rather than holding back. Whereas in a manual car, you know, if you hold a manual gear, it will hold you back. Certainly on a downhill run where you might just not want the car to pick up speed, or you might not want to keep braking. So the first benefit, and probably the biggest benefit of having a manual override with the gears, is you can do exactly that. Remember what I said before, that modern cars sort of designed to go into the most efficient gear, the highest gear, as soon as possible. But if you're on a downhill run, for example, or you're trying to hold a lower speed limit, 30 speed limit, you're trying to hold your speed at 30, what you'll find in those modern automatic cars is that they run away from you very quickly. They start picking up speed because they're in a higher gear. You're not getting much engine braking effect, if you like, or deceleration, retardation from the engine. So another common fault that I see on advanced car test is that people are constantly checking the brakes, checking the brakes, checking the brakes, just to keep the car within a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit or a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit. They are reliant on the brakes all the time to keep the speed within the speed limit. Now, you know, on the one hand, that's not going to do a lot of harm. You're not going to overheat the brakes by doing that. Certainly these days, modern brakes don't overheat in that way. Certainly not at those lower speeds. But there is a better way, and that's to just choose a lower gear. So remember, we don't use the gear to slow us down. That would be engine braking, and that wouldn't quite be appropriate. And I explained that in another video. I'll put the link in the description below. But what we can do is get our speed down to 30 and then just click the paddle once or twice just to hold your speed where you want it to be. That prevents the car from running away from you, gives you that little bit more control. Now in this car you don't need to switch modes to put it into manual. I can immediately just click the paddle and it goes straight from automatic to manual mode. Click it again and it drops down to fourth. Your car might be different. You might need to just click a button on the transmission tunnel that puts it into manual mode. In this car you can also use the gear stick to change gears as well. Gear stick, the gear selector down on the transmission tunnel. Remember, this is just a switch these days, it's not doing anything mechanical. A couple of other times you might want to use that manual override. So here for instance, twisty road, series of bends, I might want to hold a particular gear through a series of bends. So coming up to this next corner, I'm in fourth, it's quite a tight bend. I'll get my speed right, change down to third, and then hold third through the bend. That way the car isn't going to change up through the gear, and then I might want to hold third up to the next corner. So by clicking into that manual override, the car isn't changing up, it's allowing me to hold the revs a bit longer. So I get my speed right, the gear's already correct, and I can drive the car around the corner. So if you're going through a series of corners, that manual override can be really helpful. But once you've had that benefit, and once you don't need it anymore, click the car back into automatic, back into drive. The other time you might want to use that is when you're preparing for an overtake. So you're coming up behind a slow moving vehicle and you're looking for the opportunity to overtake. If you leave the car just in default automatic setting, when you eventually move sideways and press the gas to go into the overtake, there's going to be a bit of a delay because the car's going to kick down and find a lower gear as you squeeze the gas pedal. Now if you've got the car in sport, that delay will be reduced, but it's still there. But if you know that the overtake is coming up, the opportunity is there, prepare the car, take a manual gear. The other thing then is that the car won't change gear halfway through the overtake. It'll give you all the revs that you need, hold that particular gear all the way through the overtake, and then click it back into automatic again. And if you can demonstrate some of those functions in that way to your examiner, then they're going to be much more impressed with your use of the gearbox. It's fundamentally, most people just get in these cars, put them in drive, and that's all they ever do. But there's lots of different ways that you can use these different functions of automatic gearboxes. So what about the difference between a torque converter automatic and this, the DCT? Well, not many huge differences. I suppose the biggest difference that you'd notice when you first drive the car is that this car doesn't creep. It doesn't creep off the brake pedal. So normal torque converter automatics, you get in, and remember this, everything starts with the brake pedal. So get in the car, put your foot on the brake. Hold your foot on the brake while you start the car. Hold your foot on the brake while you put it into gear. A lot of cars won't let you put it into gear unless your foot is on the brake, and it's a safety override to stop the car from moving away, or to stop you from thinking you've got your foot on the brake when actually you've got your foot on the accelerator. That's quite a common cause of accidents, that. People press the brake, what they think is the brake pedal, and it's not, it's the accelerator. The car picks up speed, but in their head they're still on the brake pedal, so they press the brake pedal harder. Actually they're pressing the accelerator harder, and it gets worse and worse when they can't understand why the car isn't slowing down. So everything starts with the brake pedal, but a torque converter automatic, once you put it into drive, as soon as you lift your foot off the brake pedal, the car will creep forward. So when it comes to the end of the test, when you're doing your slow speed manoeuvring, you park into a bay, just do it all on and off the brake pedal. Come on and off the brake pedal while you're manoeuvring. And this, the DCT, and a number of the other dual clutch transmissions, not all of them, some of them creep, but remember it's got a mechanical clutch, so in order to reduce wear on that mechanical clutch, the system's designed a little bit differently. So instead of creeping, when I come off the brake pedal in this car, it doesn't do anything. I have to just very gently squeeze the gas pedal. Now if I do that and then come off the gas pedal, the car will carry on crawling forwards, and I can still control it off the brake in the same way as you would do in an automatic. The only difference is right at the start, it requires a little press of the gas pedal just to get it moving. Other than that, everything else that you're going to be doing on the advanced driving test is the same. We're looking for all the same stuff. Just remember that most common fault is not giving enough time for the car to get the gear. It's not having a little delay, a little pause between the speed phase and the acceleration phase. Now, if you drive a full electric car, there isn't a gearbox. There's no transmission. Effectively, there's no gear phase. So the system of car control in an automatic car is 4 phases: information, position, speed, and acceleration. But if you're going to do an advanced driving test in an electric car, and I encourage you to do it because it's the future, isn't it? Make sure you still put a pause in between the speed phase and the acceleration phase. Yes, the car doesn't need to get a gear, but we still want the car to settle off the brakes or off the deceleration, allow it to settle back on its springs and prepare it for the acceleration phase. Really important that you do that. Like I say, I'll borrow an electric car in the next few weeks and I'll do a supplementary video that shows what's expected from you in an electric car in relation to, you know, the gear phase and how you use it for an advanced driving test. So that's it really for this video. There's nothing more I can tell you about it for now. Let's do the usual thing and go through what the different motoring organisations are looking for when you're doing advanced driving test in an automatic vehicle. So IAM, Road Smart and ROSPA. If you want a pass at IAM, or you want a silver or a bronze at ROSPA, then you need to just demonstrate that you can get in, drive the car to the system effectively. Like I said before, you can always, you know, just put it in drive, leave it in drive throughout, and that won't prevent you from passing the test at all. But if you want a good pass, if you want a first or you want a gold at ROSPA, then you need to demonstrate to the examiner that you've got a handle on how these gearboxes work, what the different functions are, what they do, and be able to demonstrate them appropriately under the right circumstances. Here, for instance, maybe I'll just hold it in second gear just to stop us picking up speed in this 20 limit area. For the police, mentioned in a previous video that the police operationally are on the whole are moving across to automatic transmissions because there's less to brake. Bobbies are notorious for braking cars and braking gearboxes and clutches, so there's less to go wrong in an automatic. At the same time, it reduces your workload operationally driving an automatic. So especially if you're in a high-speed pursuit, or if you are in a response situation, responding to an incident, it gives you a bit more spare capacity to think about what's happening down there and what's happening at the incident, and that's the most important thing about this. So don't worry about whether you should have a manual or an automatic. Operationally, it's a help to you. On your police advanced driving test, yeah, they're looking for good understanding, good crisp use of the gearbox and its different functions, good understanding of when you should put it into sport and when you shouldn't. Be guided by your instructors. Different police forces teach this slightly differently. I know in some police forces they'll expect you to have it in sort of comfort standard when you're in speed limit areas, and every time you go into a national speed limit area, be an expectation you put it into sport. Other police forces have different views on that, so just be guided by your instructors. But on test, they're looking for good application system above everything else, but a good ability to drive the car along and use the right functions, especially that sport setting where it's appropriate, because that is something you're going to be doing operationally as well. So that's it for this video. Hope you found it useful. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and do the usual stuff. And go and have a look at the website as well, reglocal.com. Somebody pointed out to me the other day that the security certificate had expired on that website. So if you've tried getting on it recently, you've got this big warning that this site is not secure. I've fixed it now. That was my fault. That was my complete and utter lack of understanding on websites. So it's secure again now. It's safe to use. So you can get in touch. You can use the email function there to get in touch. There's loads more information there about advanced and performance driving, about the books that I've written, and how you can get a day's driver or rider coaching with me if you fancy a day out. But for now, thanks very much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.